Oh, hey, buddy, it's your old pal Scott, and this is Let's Talk Tabletop. I got a question for all of you. Does it feel like 40K has somewhat lost its flavor over the years, or is it just me? Have I played too long and I'm just bored with it? I don't really think that's the case, because I still enjoy 40K, and I still enjoy the setting and all of that. But when it comes to the different chapters of Space Marines and some of their miniatures, it seems like they're just being watered down with every new release. Let's dive into it. So I admit that I could just be biased here. So you can tell me in the comments whether or not I'm being ridiculous. But it seems to me that in previous editions, especially when all of the Space Marine chapters had different codexes, and they had a Blood Angels codex, Space Wolf codex, etc., that they had their own war gear, they had their own warlord traits, they had their own army rules, and they had a ton of custom units that were unique just to them. Now, I do know that in this current 10th edition, at the time of recording this, that they do still have detachments for each chapter, which is kind of like having a faction rule, kind of. And they also do have some of their old units that are still just specifically for that chapter. Like Space Wolves can take Grey Hunters or Blood Claws, things like that. But it seems to me like with every new edition, and especially since the introduction of Intercessors and the whole Primaris thing, it seems to me like they are losing their identity. Like a Space Wolf player's army now seems 90% the same as an Ultramarines army or a Blood Angels army or Black Templar. And to be honest with you, I think that the Black Templars actually have seen a slight resurgence over the other chapters, where Blood Angels and Space Wolves were very, very different in previous editions. And the Black Templars were just had a couple like the Novitiate squads or whatever they're called. I had a couple of those. But now, with recent additions, the Black Templars have actually gained more and more really neat looking units that look like Black Templars. And meanwhile, a lot of the things like, your intercessors are basically the new battle line for your Blood Angels and your Space Wolves. Well, they get an upgrade kit that you have to pay $16 for. And looking at the Space Wolf upgrade kit, it's like a couple of shoulder pads, maybe to do one unit, and then it's got like two wolf tassels and like a chain or a trinket. It's really not anything that looks space wolfy, you know. So essentially, if you start scrolling down, like you just select Blood Angels or you select a certain chapter, start scrolling down, and most of the time they're not even painted like the chapter that they're in that category for. And obviously, this is an example, right? They're probably all painted like Space Marine, Ultramarines. It's just an example of the miniature. But it really does go from, it used to be that all of the box sets, even the tactical Marines, there was Blood Angels tactical Marines, and they looked extremely different. I mean, to the point where it'd actually be hard for you to kit bash using a Blood Angels Space Marine if you weren't going to make it Blood Angels or a successor chapter, because there was so much iconography on it. There were so many little blood vials and little, the wings and the tabards, and there was just so much stuff on it. And personally, I thought that made it look extremely obvious who they are and what they belong to. And I really liked that. It felt like the vibe of 40K was much more unrealistic or a little more fantastical than the current editions try to make it. The intercessors, now, to be honest with you, I've never been a hater of intercessors. A lot of people hated intercessors when they first came out and all of that. I've never hated them. I thought they looked pretty cool. I didn't like the idea of them replacing the older models, but I always liked them. I like them. So I'm not coming at it from a point of, oh, I hate intercessors. I'm not saying it from that. It's just that the newer versions of things like the dreadnoughts and the intercessors and whatnot, they are just a little bit more bland. They're a little more generic, and I guess they're doing that for obvious reasons, like cost cutting, right? Why make a Blood Angels tech squad, a Space Wolf tech squad, and all of that when you can just make intercessors and, oh, here's a $16 upgrade sprue. Like it makes sense from their point of view, but it still leads me to believe, like, if you have Blood Angels intercessors in front of you, you have Space Wolf intercessors in front of you, and you have Ultramarines intercessors, Well, you're using the same models for all of them. And sure, you might have bought a couple upgrade packets and a couple of your dudes have a little wolf trinket or a blood vial or whatever. It's really not the same as those old kits that really look different. Like the Grey Hunters and Blood Claws, which are currently still in the game. They're out of stock on the website apparently, but they have a ton of stuff that lets you know, hey, this is a Space Wolf. It's more than just a paint scheme. And it seems to me now that more and more Games Workshop is going away from the unique chapters and more towards this is a Space Marine. If you want to paint a little bit on his shoulder pad or give him a certain color scheme, then that's fine. But that's it. It's really not that creative or interesting. And meanwhile, I think that Age of Sigmar is really the place where we get the most extreme creativity from Games Workshop between 40K and that. Everything in 40K is kind of they're trying to go a little more realistic and a little more serious. Whereas Age of Sigmar, because it's fantasy, they don't mind going silly with it, right? Like those kangaroo cavalry, right? Lumineth Realm Lords are literally riding kangaroo animals, and everyone's cool with it because it's neat, right? It's weird, and you may not like it, but it's some people like it surely, and it's definitely unique. You can't say you've ever seen kangaroo riders before, or the big bulls that are made out of stone, or any of the things like the Kroll Boys, the I forget what they're called, the Muckraker Ogroid or whatever it's called. All those things are very unique looking, and it's nothing that you see in 40K anymore. 40K seems to it's gone from a time where you had the uh, what was it, the void grenades or whatever that would roll around and destroy things, and the orcs are blowing themselves up on a one, and you had the shock attack gun, which was really random. It could hurt you just as much as the opponent, and you had all this random stuff, and now they're cutting the randomness out of it, making it more and more and more reliable. In some editions, orcs were the best shooters in the game because they had so many shots, even though they hit on fives, but with stratagems and things like that, rerolls and whatnot, they were argued to be the best shooters in the game. And you're like, well, orcs really shouldn't be the best shooters in the game. They should be good in close combat, obviously. But it seems like even in those cases, a lot of it's being stripped away. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this, I think. Number one, I've already mentioned that economically it makes more sense for all the chapters to be similar and it's just slight tweaks or a paint scheme. Makes sense. The other element to this is that it's really hard to balance such a vast game such as 40K or Age of Sigmar, giving everybody unique stuff, right? If every one of your units in your Blood Angels army is different from your Space Wolf or different from your Space Marine army, well, they're similar enough. I mean, they're Space Marines, right? They have a jump pack, they have a chainsword, they have a bolt gun. But then you've got to find ways in the rules to make exceptions for them to be different. Like, I believe it was 8th edition, Space Wolves +1 to hit when they charge. Blood Angels +1 to wound when they charge. That sort of thing. Well, if it's a new edition, Games Workshop has to do new things, right? Just to make it different for the sake of you buying it. So then, oh, we can't do +1 to hit, +1 to wound anymore. So now what are we going to do? Okay, well, and it gets really, really complex when you have the faction abilities, faction war gear, and the units that are specific to a faction, but they're all kind of the same, right? I mean, like a Vanguard Vet squad versus a Death Company squad with jump packs, kind of the same. I mean, I know they're different, but only so much. So it makes it really, really hard for such an expansive game to stay balanced when they have to, every new edition, okay, here we go, nose to the grindstone, we got to come up with more and more and more rules for all these things, and it's got to be different from last edition. That's got to be really cumbersome and really tiresome. So I understand why they're doing it from a gameplay standpoint, game design standpoint. I also understand why they're doing it from an economic standpoint, right? From production and all of that. It's just a shame that they seem like they slightly they seem to be abandoning the really neat, weird, quirky things that make it feel like 40K. The Sanguinary Guard is a perfect example of this. They went from this, which even if it's not your cup of tea, you got to admit it's very iconic. It's very, very iconic. All the way to this, which is like little teeny wings. It would almost be better if you kept the wings off it. Like the little wings seem silly, kind of like Namor's ankle wings, in Marvel. It's just a little silly. And meanwhile, they already had the answer to an updated Sanguinary Guard jump pack. This chaplain, right here. He's got the wings. They're not too big and bulky. They're stylized. And I really thought they would go this route with it when they redid the Sanguinary Guard. And instead we get the little birdie wings. I don't know, man. It just seems weird. And another reason why they come to think of it, another example of them streamlining rules is how like the Harlequin weapons are all the same now. The Sanguinary Guard weapons are all the same now. The a lot of the units are just having all their weapons turned into one thing. And it's because so you've got faction, you've got artifact, you've got all this, then you got special unit, and then you've got special weapons in the special unit. It gets so cumbersome for them to make new stuff. I'm not hating on 40k. I still enjoy 40k, but it does seem like if you bring salamanders and I bring ultramarines, it's pretty much a mirror match. And even our models don't look very different. Sure, yours are green, mine are blue. All right. Like it's just not that interesting anymore. Whereas I do think that Age of Sigmar is still willing to be weird with it, to be out of the out of their normal box that they're in, and I appreciate that. I think the Age of Sigmar models are getting better and better compared to the 40k ones because they're more interesting. That's why you buy a model if you're not chasing the meta. You buy a model because it's interesting looking. It's fantastical. It's crazy. It's something you don't see every day. I mean, they can make an army of just businessmen carrying briefcases, but we see that every day. Why would you want that army? Like, it's silly. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate you liking, subscribing, sharing, all of that. Thank you to my beautiful, sexy, good-smelling Patreon patrons displayed right here. I love each and every one of you. And check out Brutality, Skirmish War Game, and Mass Brutality. Mass Brutality, use any miniatures. You can, just today on this board, I played my Khorne Bloodbound from Age of Sigmar versus my friend's Blood Angels, and I mean, it works beautifully. It was designed to work that way. So check it out at brutalityskirmishwargame.com and support independent creators such as myself. We greatly appreciate it. And I will see you next week.